Hi everyone, welcome back to Stefan Livera podcast. Today we're going to be doing an interesting one on the Bitcoin network and observing what's happening. So joining me today is the famous 0x B10C, or I believe now you've rebranded to B10C. So welcome to the show, B10C.
All right, thanks for having me. Yeah, B10C is a bit shorter and rolls off the tongue a bit better, I think.
Right, yeah.
Even
and I was looking
perfect,
at this up as well
perfect.
because does the 0x in that context imply hexadecimal, and now you're just kind of, just for simplicity, you're just known as B10C?
So somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, you're an Ethereum guy," and I was, "Why?" And he's like, "You got the 0x before it," and I was like, "Oh, I have to rebrand." It's shorter.
Okay. So. Well, let's start. Just for listeners who have no idea who you are, obviously you're known as a NIM in the Bitcoin developer world, and let's say in maybe some of the Bitcoin mining circles as well. Can you just, obviously only what you're willing to share, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you see as your role in this Bitcoin ecosystem?
Right. So I've been working on Bitcoin open source projects for a few years. I think since 2021 full time, and I'm supported by different grant organizations doing my work. And I built a couple of monitoring tools for different parts of the Bitcoin network. And I think that's the main thing I'm known for. But I also enjoy doing data analysis on some of the data I extract from this, or in general some of the data that is there, either on the blockchain or you can find elsewhere. So for example, I looked at what mining pools include in their blocks and what they leave out. And we actually found out that, for example, some mining pools leave out OFAC sanctions transactions, which we weren't aware of before. And that's something as a community, I think that's important to be aware of. Obviously, mining pools can choose what they include in their blocks, but I think it's for a community, it's good to be aware of, since one of the key points of Bitcoin is the censorship resistance. And if we found out all pools are including some kind of transactions, then maybe the censorship resistance part of the Bitcoin idea wouldn't hold up anymore. And
Excellent.
also looked at, for example, what the stratum jobs of the different mining pools, what they send out, and what they contain, and found out there that different mining pools actually send out the same stratum work. So they actually send out the same block template or build on the same block template. And this is mainly Antpool and some of their friends, I call them. So Antpool and friends, they might appear as different mining pools based on the name they put in the Coinbase transaction, but in reality they're actually the same mining pool, or the same node that's created for the block template. Right, and this
Fantastic.
is for the data analysis part, but I've also contributed to Bitcoin Core, built their tracing framework, and different smaller side projects here and there.
Now, I think one of the earlier things that perhaps you became known for was, as you mentioned, the OFAC thing. So for listeners who aren't aware, it's this relates to what's called sanctions laws, and basically governments around the world have sanctions regimes, and they might have a list. So I think in the US it's called the SDN or something, like sanction designated, whatever. Anyway, the point is they put some Bitcoin addresses on there, and as I'm understanding, this is some of your early work where you were trying to point out, are there mining pools who are not including transactions that are sent to the addresses listed in this sanctions list? So can you just elaborate a little bit on some of your research there?
Yeah, correct. So you look at if a pool is sending, or if a pool is filtering out transactions sending to these addresses or spending from these addresses. So both ways. We don't. I actually don't know what's really forbidden there. And I'm not sure if it's 100% clear. But people, especially people in the US, tend to be careful not to touch any addresses involved in OFAC stuff. And I guess it makes sense for them not to do it. And if you want to detect someone not or a mining pool not interacting with these addresses, you build a block template yourself, And if a new block comes in, you compare the block template you built to the template of the pool, and you're going to get some mismatches here and there, because mempools and different transaction relay and so on. But you're going to see if, for example, one pool is repeatedly not including one transaction, or if one transaction is repeatedly not included by different pools. And if it turns out this is like an OFAC sanctioned transaction, and you see this maybe 10 times, then you have a high likelihood of this pool, or you can say with a high likelihood this pool is probably filtering out these transactions. But it's not only for OFAC transactions, it's in general like interesting. What do mining pools mine? Which could also tell you, for example, on which version of Bitcoin Core there are on, and different other stuff. Or maybe it can also tell you what a mining pool includes. A mining pool might include 0 free transactions, which payouts their mining pool customers in these transactions. So these won't normally be included, but they are including them.
I see. Yeah, and maybe there's kind of just special cases where they'll do this kind of thing where, I think there's an infamous case where I think it was the F2 pool founder, I think, actually at the time, I think it was Luke Dasher was asking for like a donation, and I think he paid him out of a Coinbase output, right? Like it was like a baller move that he had paid out of his own pool kind of thing.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah. I also asked the F2 pool founder a while ago to include like a non-standard transaction. That's something else you're going to see pools include. And I asked the founder to include a non-standard transaction. He actually did it. So it was a fun experiment.
Yeah, so I guess we should just touch on, sort of finish the censorship discussion as well. Because, I mean, maybe even that term might be the wrong... I don't know, maybe it's not the correct term to apply, but...
I think it's filtering. It's filtering.
Right.
Because censorship would imply that's all... there is no way of this transaction getting through. There are other, maybe smaller pools or solo miners or whatever, who are going to pick up this transaction because they're not, for example, in the US, or they think they are not affected by the sanctions.
Yeah.
So they
are quote unquote black market hash rate or black market pool.
Whatever.
Let's say.
Yeah. So I think it's filtering is the right term, and not sanctioning, or not censoring.
Not censorship. Yeah. And it's interesting because a few years ago, and I believe you were around at this time, right? It was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Mara had this thing where like it would say like OFAC compliant, something like this, and then basically a lot of people were kind of social media campaigning them to like stop doing that, because that was seen, at least at that time, people weren't using the term filtering. They were saying, no, but you're censoring, and like the whole point of Bitcoin is to be censorship resistant and so on. Do you have any comment on that? You were around then, right?
Yeah, this was actually the main motivation for... So BitMEX Research did a nice blog post speculating of what is going to happen if Mara pool launches and is OFAC compliant. And this was the main motivation for building out the mining pool observer tool, which actually looks at the block templates and compares it. And I just finished it up when Marathon pool just mined their first block. I was ready and could say, okay, for they say it's OFAC compliant, but there weren't any sanctioned transactions around at the time, and so they actually didn't filter anything for at least the.
So it didn't even matter at that time.
No, because like the people rarely like if a address makes it onto the list, it's probably dormant at the time. So there is rarely any activity on these anymore. Sometimes there is a new one coming up and there is still some activity, but at some point it dies down. I guess it's super easy to switch to just a new address that's not on the list. And it only matters for like address reuse, which
and that does track with, at least historically. Now again, I'm talking in tendencies and things like this, but it's definitely a thing that like hacked coins, or coins that were stolen, whatever, rumored to be by Lazarus Group or whatever. It's like it's been a thing that some big exchange would get hacked and those coins just wouldn't move. They would just like sit there for ages. Now of course other coins, they go through mixers and whatever, and there's other techniques that they're applying, or maybe they're using mules to try to get out through KYC exchanges and things like this. But it would say, yeah, that's at least that tracks at least this idea that there are a bunch of these coins that just sit there, they don't move. So be it.
Yeah, actually, let me look it up. Okay, there is currently 680 UTXOs with a total value of 9,305 BTC on sanctioned addresses, which is a lot more than I was expecting. I think when I last looked at it was like 63. So it must be like a new address on there or so. So quite a few addresses, quite a few UTXOs, and quite a few BTC on these sanctioned addresses right now.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you know better than me. I'm just saying colloquially from what you've sort of heard. Okay. And then I'm curious, in your research, did you see a difference in the treatment between, let's say, a Chinese mining pool and an American mining pool, or a non-US, non-China mining pool? Like, did you notice differences in their treatment of the so-called sanctioned transactions?
So I only detected for F2 pool that they're filtering these out, and actually we only know if many people send or spend from these OFAC sanction transactions, and I haven't tracked if there have been any recently. So
Okay.
I can't really comment on that.
Sure. Yeah, and I guess because the argument might also go, well, just because it's sanctioned by the US doesn't mean some other country cares, and
of course,
I guess the general Bitcoin argument would be the whole point is it's censorship resistant. And so just because one particular mining pool doesn't want to take that transaction or include it in their block, someone else will. And the idea is that the person who is hypothetically trying to get their transaction through, they can just keep increasing the fee until such time that there is a mining pool who's willing to take that.
Right.
Now, again,
Yep.
not defending. Now, to be clear for listeners, obviously not defending, actual criminals, terrorists, anything like this, but just talking, let's say, more academically about the network under the condition of people trying to make it censorship resistant.
Yeah, totally agree. That's my goal with it as well. I'm not based in the US. I have no ties to the US, so I personally don't care too much about OFAC. But if there is some other country coming out with addresses that are sanctioned and miners based in these for whatever reason sanctioned, could be like truck protests that we saw in Canada, and now these addresses getting sanctioned or whatever. Like we want to be aware of if there is censorship going on or filtering going on, and if it's turning into censorship, and it's really hard to get these transactions mined. Just to be aware of if like, does Bitcoin hold up to this censorship resistant property? We hope it has.
Yeah, and I guess, so to your knowledge then, it's only the US that has Bitcoin sanctioned addresses. Now, I believe the EU does have sanctions, like in fiat sanctions, and other countries have their own sanctions regimes, but it seems that it's only the US that explicitly adds these Bitcoin addresses to their SDN list. Is that correct? Is that your understanding?
Yeah, as far as I know, yeah.
Yeah.
If someone else knows something different, please let me know. I'd love to track these as well. But as far as I understand, yeah.
Great. Okay. And then I guess the other big one you mentioned just earlier was this concept of multiple mining pools using the same block template. So do you mind just elaborating a little bit on that? And I guess what we're getting to here is this kind of ant pool and friends kind of argument. So what's your thought there?
Yeah, sure. So you can, if you connect to a mining pool, and say, hey, give me work for my ASIC, they're going to send you not the full block template, but they're going to send you like parts of the block template hashed together. So the Merkle branches, so it can build up to a Merkle root. Not going deeper than this here, but you can compare these Merkle branches that the pool sends you, and if they match across pools, then there is a very high likelihood, and if they match across like a longer time span, there is a very high likelihood of the pool being actually like only like a proxy pool, so they issue the same work. The work is based on the same block template. So we know there is probably one node running, and it's queried for like a block template, and this block template is then sent out through different names of mining pools, but in the end or underlying is actually the same mining pool. the same person that is like the owner of the company and can make decisions on what transactions to include and exclude from this block template. So this goes in the same filtering direction, but also goes in the centralization direction, where if there's now like a mining pool that has like under the hood in reality like more than 50% of the hash rate, it's really easy for them to make, for example, the famous 51% attack. But you might only see it if you look at the stratum work, because on the blockchain they all put like a different name in their blocks. So in mempool space, if you go there, it might tell you, well, this is from Brains, and this is from Antpool, and this is from Foundry. But they won't tell you, oh, this is from actually Antpool and Brains could be the same entity based on the block template we saw.
Just adding one other point to this, and I'm sure you're aware of this, is it's not just the stratum work component of it. Is I think some people were sort of doing chain analysis and basically looking at where the payouts were going, and at least a couple of years ago, this is true. I don't know if it still is, that a lot of the mining pool payouts were going to the same, I believe, some entity called Kobo in China, because apparently they were like an OTC desk. So then it was sort of like, not only was the stratum aspect of it being a proxy pool, the payouts were also going the same place.
Multiple like things pointing, or multiple data points pointing at the existence of like some bigger consortium of miners colluding in some way. We obviously don't know. We don't have insights into their like their what they have written up or what their agreements are, but we can only speculate there.
Okay. Now, this does throw into question around all the arguments around, Bitcoin mining decentralization. Of course, we want it to be decentralized. I think most people can agree with that. But maybe where people might disagree is where they might say, well, pool entry is still relatively open, or the fact that they might say, hang on, these pools are just an intermediary. The underlying miners or hashes, if you want to use that different parlance, those hashes can just point their hash rate somewhere else. That if they see something wrong, now, to be clear and to be fair to you, some of your work might help them understand if there is some kind of filtering happening at the pool level. But theoretically, those hashes can, without a huge amount of effort, although even that's a debated point maybe, so those hashes can point their hash rate to some other pool. And in that way, the argument could be, well, it's still decentralized in that sense. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, totally agree. So some mining or bigger mining farms might have agreements with a big mining pool to say, okay, you have to point your hash rate here because we helped you finance your miners or something like this. But they're also like, if there is a small operation, it's maybe like self-bootstrapped or whatever. They obviously can freely switch pools. And they should do it. Obviously, they need to have some insights into, okay, here's something wrong. People need to raise awareness for them to get aware of it. But definitely, like the underlying hardware distribution, where the hardware actually sits and who owns the hardware, is probably quite decentralized. But then again, the next point is like, where is actually all the hardware coming from?
Right, and that's back to Bitmain and so on.
Yeah. It's mostly one manufacturer, or the biggest manufacturer has a big market share.
Yeah, I see. So because there's different ways you can slice and dice that aspect. As you mentioned, it's mainly Bitmain, and I think the MicroBT, the creators of WhatsMiner. But then I know there are some competitors. There is some competition there.
Yeah,
like,
there is
Proto, the
Proto from
one
Block
from Dorsey's Block. Yeah. And maybe some other smaller ones. I know there's what's it called? Auradine or Auradine? I don't know how to pronounce it, but I believe they have an SV2 compatible, or it's like built into the mining machine.
Yeah, that's a new one. I haven't heard too much from it, but I think that's a new one coming up or similar. Yeah. Yeah,
I guess then do you have any further thought there, or any point you want to make there about mining? Actually, that's the other point I was going to ask you around FPPS and PPLNS or PPLNS style payout models. So this has been another, let's say, big debate and talking point, which is that FPPS is sort of like an insurance product for some of these mining pools. And so you need a large balance sheet because you are like fronting the capital. You're paying them out before you've actually received the incoming. Of course, there have been arguments there from some of the other pool operators saying that's, maybe that's the wrong thing or that's not the good thing for Bitcoin decentralization. Obviously here, like Ocean is one example with their datum, and then another it would be the demand pool with their, they have full SV2. And so they would be probably in the camp of, they arguably see themselves as going against FPPS. Do you have any comment on the payout structure for mining pools?
So two things come to mind. So one is, I think there is one big entity or one insurer behind some of the FPPS pools, and that's why some of them need to, like, that's a speculation. I can't confirm this. I don't have any insights into contracts here, but speculation is that there is one insurer that is helping like smaller pools or like little pools with some of the capital, and helping them if they don't find a block, helping them with their FPPS. And the second comment is obviously, I think with FPPS, you don't as an ASIC miner, you sell your hash rate for the block subsidy, but I don't think you're actually getting much of the fees. And we saw this during fee spikes. The miners at non-FPPS pools were actually making a lot more in revenue compared to others who mine at FPPS pools, because maybe the pool keeps the FPPS, the fee part, or has to give it to the insurer, or I don't know what the right deal there is. But that's the two things that come to mind for me there.
Yeah. Okay, understood. And then while we're here, I'm not sure how close you are with this, but Bitcoin Core V30 has this new thing. I think it's called, I was just looking it up, it's called IPC Inter-Process Communication Mining Interface. And the idea is it was a way for SV2 to connect with Bitcoin Core. I'm curious if any of your work touches in this area or not really.
Not at the moment, but I'm looking forward to exploring this interface a bit as well. I think it's a good next step of like having getting real time data out of Bitcoin Core, especially like for the mining side, but also there for other sides. So I definitely want to play around with it in future projects, and also like the mining pool observer project I built a while ago. It used the IPC way of getting a block template. But I think actually like investing some time into it and getting it to get the block template via IPC would be very helpful in some future like small hack project on it.
I see, yeah. And as I understand, the SV2 guys, the Strata V2 guys, see that as, they've been trying to get something like this into Core, and I think this was their way of making it. Because their goal obviously would be to have ecosystem support, right? Like the pools to support it, the mining machines to support it, and Bitcoin Core to support it, and of course people to demand it themselves, like to want to use it. And so I guess this is one step to sort of in that direction. And so they're also trying to show various things about SV2 being better, things like, okay, the communication layer is encrypted, and obviously the block template creation can be decentralized. That's probably the big headline thing, but there are these other benefits that some of those guys are talking about.
Yeah, additionally, for like the IPC interface, it's great because you can now, this was the original motivation for it, was that you can now run a different process for your node and your wallet and your GUI, and you have these separate and not the same process. So some attacker can't go via like the P2P messages and in some way crash your node, and now your wallet and GUI shuts down as well. Or maybe he can, but if for example the wallet crashes or the GUI crashes, your node won't crash because they're because they're not in the same process anymore, because they're using this inter-process communication, this IPC interface.
And let's now talk a bit, you were touching on it there, but let's talk about your broader project, which is this peer observer project. I see this is one of the newer ones that you are working on. Can you give us an overview? What is the peer observer project?
Cool, yeah. So peer observer is both a tool and infrastructure, and the idea is to detect attacks on nodes in the P2P network, but also like anomalies that these nodes show in some way. And the motivation for it was, I was reading in, I think, 2021 or so, I was reading on some attack that happened on the P2P network. And after thinking about it for a while, I noticed, well, this was only detected by coincidence. Different people saw it, but only because they were, for example, reviewing a PR and were looking at logs, or some guy building a custom node implementation saw that his node implementation couldn't handle the attack and crashed in some way. And I thought, well, wait, with a $2 trillion network, but not at the time, but now we have a $2 trillion network. We want to have some monitoring in place, so we can detect these attacks a bit more professionally and say, well, there is something going on. Do we need to react in any kind of way? Does this need a fix? And the question I always ask is like, what do other $2 trillion network or companies, have in monitoring and incident response teams, and how many people do they have on call? Like, think about like a company like Meta. How many people do you think they have on call right now? And how many people does Bitcoin have on call right now to respond to incidents on the network and fix stuff? Obviously, that's not an apples to apples comparison, but definitely like motivation to say, okay, we should be a bit more professional about monitoring in general, not only P2P monitoring. This network we have is a very valuable asset, and if something goes wrong there, nobody can send transactions, and nobody can mine blocks, and everything building on top of it is going to break in some way.
And as I recall from the earlier days, there used to be this kind of network alert key thing. I don't know the detail of it now, and I think that's now since been retired, to be clear.
Oh yeah.
Because that is also kind of a centralization vector. So at the same time, it's like this thing has grown so much compared to early days of Bitcoin. You want a way for people to sort of obviously track and stay up to date on what's going on, and then also if a fix is needed, how do you get the word out, right?
Yeah. Right, and the route I choose with the peer observer project is to have passive monitoring. So you can also have active monitoring. Active monitoring is you connect to all nodes on the network that are reachable.
Oh, like a spy node kind of thing.
Yeah, for example, or it could also be like a research node. It's not only like spies. Like spies always has this negative touch to it.
Right.
But I choose the passive route. So I have like well-behaving Bitcoin Core nodes and NOTS nodes and whatever, like in different locations around the world. They all are well-behaving. They all behave like very, not like completely stock normal nodes, and I call them honeypot nodes. So I have the hope that an attacker or a network-wide attacker also happens to attack one of my nodes, and I have just attached a bunch of monitoring tools and infrastructure to it, so we can actually know what happened to this node. We have logs from it, we have data, we have metrics from it, and we can get an idea of, okay, what happened to this node, and why is it, for example, crashing, or why is it slowing down, or what else? Yeah.
Interesting. And as you mentioned in your, I believe it was in your blog, you mentioned that you run them with different configurations, right? Some of them are on Tor and I2P and CJDNS, and one is got like, you said Bloom filters, known to be DOSable. Talk us through some of the different configurations that you have on this.
Yeah, so the goal is twofold. So we want to detect if someone comes from the outside and sends up something we end up slowing down on, so a denial of service, or if the node internally has a problem, like for example a bug in some feature, maybe not even like a much used feature, like a feature that's only used by like a selected few percent on the network. So that's why I said, okay, to have good coverage there, we want to run these nodes with different configurations. So for example, I have nodes running on Tor, but also nodes running on I2P. So Tor and I2P are both the privacy networks. And there's a third network that's called CJDNS. It's not really a privacy network, it's more like an overlay network. I have some nodes running there. There's not much activity, node activity on this network right now, but maybe we're going to see more of it in the future. And as you mentioned, I have some nodes with Bloom filters. And Bloom filters are the predecessor of the compact block filters that we have now. And they leak some privacy information, and they're also known to be DOSable. So if someone connects to you and actually requests a bunch of these filters from you, you know it will slow down, and that's known in DOS vector. And they're disabled by default. Very few people run them. But I actually, like on this node, which I run this on, I actually have seen it getting DOSed. Just because there are still some old wallets out there, the old Shieldball wallets that haven't implemented the compact block filters. They still rely on these Bloom filter nodes to be available. So if a new Bloom filter node comes online, they all reach out to it, and in some way DOS it. They overload it with requests for these filters. And I also run, for example, one node with a ban list just to see what happens to this node if I exclude these known or maliciously known IP addresses from connecting to it, and what happens to the other nodes where they're not banned. I'm also testing the AES-map project on it, on some of the nodes. Some of the nodes are pruned, some of them are unpruned. Some of them have like very many inbound connection slots available for peers. So just what happens if 500 inbound connections are on this node compared like to the normal 115, and one node is just running in blocks only mode, so it doesn't have mempool. Yeah. You get a feeling just to cover as many ground here as possible.
I see, yeah. And so are there any overall insights that you have to share from what you've done so far on the Peer Observer project?
So generally, it produces more data than one person can handle and analyze, I noticed. And also, like, not everything can be done with passive monitoring. So if you want to look at, for example, block propagation, you need some active monitoring as well, because these passive nodes don't connect to all of the network. You don't get like a good sample of what happens on the network. You only get the local view of what happens with your peers and your node, but you don't get the global view of the network. And for some of the data that is really helpful for research, you want to have this global view of the network, if you can get it. But I think it's generally good to have. The feedback has been very positive. My hope is that there's other people looking at other stuff as well to monitor. So I'm currently focusing on P2P stuff, especially on the passive stuff. But there's so much other things to look at in Bitcoin data and things to monitor for. And people are doing it. Like there is people now doing the monitoring the stretchum works that Pool sent out and so on. But yeah, so definitely good to have a P2P monitoring, but there is so much more if we want to do good coverage of general Bitcoin network monitoring.
So what other non-P2P things that you think need to be monitored, or what else would be interesting to monitor?
Yeah, good question. So for some other thing that people have been monitoring is like in general like forks and reorgs and stale blocks and so on.
Oh, okay,
yeah. So BitMEX Research is running the fork monitor,
like a fork monitor thing,
right? And I have a similar tool called Fork Observer. I have all my tools have the Observer top domain. Yeah, and I guess that's one thing, and there is the stretchum.work thing, and mempool space also has this in some capacity that they monitor like what pools send out. But I think there is plenty of things. If you look at some stuff, there is plenty of lower hanging fruits to detect, and to learn if you start to do monitoring in some area that interests you. But I don't have like a list of things for people right now.
In terms of cost, what does it cost to do this? Like, how do you is it a big cost to do this, or is it a cheap cost?
Since I initially built this out myself, and I have grant funding, but I don't have any other funding for it, or had any other funding for it, I tried to make this as cheap as possible. So I think if running one node is like $5 USD per month or so, and then like scaling this up, I think I currently run 18 nodes or so. That's so it's not too expensive, and a lot of people have stepped up and said, hey, we're going to sponsor some of these nodes. For example, Brink has been sponsoring some of them, MIT DCI as well. They were initially very helpful in getting this bootstrapped, sponsoring me with nodes. The localhost research people are also sponsoring a node. Chaincode is not sponsoring a node. And even some individuals stepped up and said, hey, I have capacity, I can sponsor like a node or so. But I think currently it's not the bottleneck is not spinning up new nodes and running new nodes and maintaining them, but it's more actually getting people on board, looking at the data. But yeah, because
right. Analyze the logs and things like this.
Yeah, and thinking about new metrics to track, and maybe even working on some anomaly detection frameworks or so. Because what does more data help you if you can't process it right now? I think next step would be to look more looking at the data and not producing more data.
Understood. Okay. So talk to us a little bit about how you're getting that. Like, what kinds of data are we talking about here? Now, let's say in the world of P2P, like, are we talking things like the INV message and that like kind of that version negotiation between nodes, like how peers find each other, this kind of thing? This is the realm that we're talking about, right?
Yes. So the peer observer tooling. So a peer observer, I split it in three components. So tooling, infrastructure, and data analysis. And the tooling is like what hooks into different interfaces of a node. And one of the interfaces is the tracing interface of Bitcoin Core. And from there we can get a very good view of like what P2P messages are exchanged. So for example, when a connection is opened, the version message and the ver messages being exchanged and so on, but also over time, like addresses being gossiped, blocks being propagated, and transactions being shared. But it could also be like connections being opened. And if you for example observe like a node getting a very high rate of connections being opened to it, could also be like an indication that something is wrong. Definitely these, but also like just simply like a transaction getting added to mempool, or a transaction getting replaced in the mempool is something that we can track or is interesting to track. Because like, for example, a network-wide attacker could do like a attack where he replaces a lot of transactions over and over and over again, which costs a lot of bandwidth for all nodes on the network. And that's something we want to see. So definitely like transactions getting replaced as well.
So just to make this, I guess, practical for listeners, and especially people who aren't, let's say, as deep into the weeds, let's talk about what is the expected behavior for a Bitcoin node and what would be unexpected behavior, or typically like spy node behavior, or like aggressively trying to connect. So maybe you could talk us through like what is like a standard expected node, what are the normal behaviors you should see first, and then we can talk about what is like a more malicious or maybe questionable node might do.
All right. So if you run a node at home, and it's behind a firewall, it's going to open a few outbound connections. So it's going to reach out to a few peers on the network, and it's going to ask them for transactions and blocks, and it's going to share these with the connected peers. Now compare that to a node you run in, for example, a cloud provider, and it doesn't have a firewall. So the port 8063 is open and people can connect to it. like additional to these outbound connections, it's going to make some of the outbound connections are going to reach it as well. So it's going to be inbound connections on this node.
Right. You're reachable. The word is right. Yeah.
There, it's going to accept by default, I think, 114 or 115 connections. These are going to fill up over time. The IP address of this node, this cloud node, is going to spread out across the network, and maybe one of the nodes at home is going to say, "Hey, I'm missing one of my 8 or 10 or 11 outbound connections. I'm going to open a connection to this cloud node." And over time, the cloud node will fill up all the inbound connection slots. So, and one thing that an attacker could do is the attacker could go ahead and say, okay, I want to open many connections to this cloud node, as many as possible, and fill up many of these inbound slots there as possible,
right.
and just don't do anything with it. Just
right.
sit there dormant.
Kind of like
don't
a griefing method sort of thing.
Yeah. That's one attacker could do, but it could also do it could connect to many outbound or many of these cloud nodes and just say, okay, hey, send me data about like transactions, and the node will happily do it. But then again, it might reveal while doing so that it that it knows about one transaction earlier than the rest of the network does. And this would, for example, be a privacy leak where the attacker could tell, hey, because I'm spying on all nodes in the network and I saw this node broadcast the transaction first, it's probably this node or this IP address that initially created this transaction, and no, I can't tie the UTXO to this IP address. And that would be another,
as I recall, this
attack.
is like part of the motivation for like the whole Dandelion protocol thing. I don't think the Dandelion thing made it into core, but the idea was, if you had like some super nodes like all around the world, and you were trying to aggressively connect to everybody, so you would find out where it first appeared, and then you could sort of triangulate, it was very likely it came from this location, and if it is a home IP, then boom, they already are able to figure out with other information, like they could potentially figure out your address, and that's also obviously a doxing.
Or if it's like a big node from an exchange or so, and they see all these transactions first originate at this big node, and they know, oh wait, this transaction is actually from exchange XYZ. Then they can say, okay, well, we can actually tag this this IP address.
This is the Coinbase coins. This is Binance coins or whatever. Right? Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, and of course, even nowadays in the age of, let's say when treasury companies come out and announce, we just bought this many coins, like people are trying to like trace on chain to sort of understand, okay, where are these coins coming from? What's their OTC provider? What's their custodian? There are things people are trying to figure out by kind of looking at these things in the background, kind of under the hood. So I guess in the realm of expected behaviors, you should see nodes just, syncing up the chain, forwarding transactions and forwarding blocks and receiving transactions where they need to. But then in the malicious side of things, let's say the malicious or spy node might be kind of aggressively connecting to everybody, or aggressively like griefing your network slots, or kind of aggressively asking for information even if it doesn't need it, this kind of thing, right?
Yeah, for example, but I think we're looking for, while doing so, we're looking for a lot of unknowns. There are so many things that someone can do to your node. So while monitoring it, you have to look for unknowns. You don't know what you can't map all possible attack vectors beforehand. So
gotcha. So it's more just like you have some rough ideas of what attackers have done before,
right,
but there's always something new they could try.
Or you know what normal behavior is, and if you see something that's way out of the
baseline, then okay, that's something I need to research or analyze. Right. Okay,
and this is usually always the flow going into the data, and this is part of it. If I see something that's not, as you say, not in the baseline, I go into it and say, hey, is this actually worth analyzing? Is this something that could be in some way malicious or dangerous, or should we dive deeper into it, and maybe I write up some blog posts about it or so. And then the next step is also like, should we react to it? Is there something we can do to mitigate this? Is there a way of reacting to it? And we previously talked about the spy node behavior, and there's actually like a pull request that came out of one of these analyses I did. So Vasil is working on a pull request where we don't do Dandelion, but we do send out transactions over Tor or I2P peers first, and then see if it comes back to us into our mempool through a different peer, and then say, okay, this transaction is broadcast. We don't send it out to IPv4 and IPv6 peers first. So that's a bit of a privacy preserving way of doing transaction broadcast, which I think originated from some of the data analysis we did with the peer observer project.
Gotcha. I'm curious how that impacts or is impacted by the V2 peer-to-peer encryption. Because don't we already have that now as of like a few versions back? So is that, not enough, or you see it as like that's just like some orthogonal thing?
Right, I think it's completely orthogonal. The P2P v2 thing is you want to hide from an ISP or like a global attacker that can read all network traffic. So before v2 transport, like the messages being exchanged were private, and afterwards, before v2 the message exchange were unencrypted, and with v2 they're encrypted. So this hides from an attacker sitting on the wire, like a passive attacker, just recording all network traffic, sitting on the wire. This hides when a transaction was broadcast here and there. But if you're a node and you connect to someone else via IPv4, for example, they're going to see, hey, this IP address arrived from this other node, from my home node, for example, to this other node. And the other node is then able to tell, hey, okay, this is the first time I saw this transaction. It must be from B10C. So the different attackers in a sense. So one is the spy node attacker, and one is the global attacker. And the global attacker it's gotten a bit harder for the global attacker or for the ISP attacker to spy on nodes, because the V2 encryption of the protocol messages is there now.
So while we're talking about spy nodes and other entities, I know you did a post about this entity you named as Linking Lion. So tell us the story here. Who or what do we know about Linking Lion?
So I first noticed Linking Lion probably because they're opening like a lot of connections to all nodes on the network. So I think at times I have like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 connections from them, from different IP addresses, but all from the same IP address block, all reaching multiple of my nodes. So on all of the nodes, I see the same IP address blocks being connected to me. And then I started looking into, okay, what are they doing? Why are they opening these many connections? And they just sit there and they listen for transactions my node tells them. And then looking at the IP addresses, I found out, wait, actually these IP addresses all belong to the same AS. So they all registered with the same party. This party happens to be called Link Line Networks. I don't think actually these are like the people doing it. I think these are the people just providing infrastructure, because probably the infrastructure is rented from them.
They're like an ISP for whoever's doing this.
Yeah, for example. And then it turns out these IP addresses are on like a ban list Greg Maxwell published in like 2018. So they have been around for a while. And then it turns out these IP addresses also appear on like a Monero ban list. And at this point, it was like, okay, if they appear on Bitcoin for ages, and the IP addresses appear on Monero for ages, this must be some kind of Chainalysis company spying on Monero and Bitcoin
I see. Yeah,
trying
like a chain
to
analysis or one of these other ones, elliptic
not,
or whatever.
specifically like this Genesis company, but like some company trying
I guess
to
the point
improve
is it fits the pattern. It fits the pattern of a chain surveillance company.
Yeah. So in some way, trying to improve their products by having this additional data, by linking like this multi-dimensional data, by having blockchain data and IP address data for transactions, by linking them together. I guess you can create like a good model of who owns which coins or which IP address interacted with which coins by doing so.
This episode is brought to you by CoinKite, the makers of my favorite Bitcoin hardware wallet, the Cold Card Q. Now, some people think self-custody is too hard, but it's really about taking responsibility for your Bitcoin wealth and understanding that self-custody gives you a true feeling of liberty. The Cold Card Q has a full keyboard and big screen. It's got 2 secure elements and a true air gap, allowing you to go fully air-gapped using QR codes from seed generation to transaction signing. You can power the device using 3 AAA batteries, so you don't even have to plug it into the wall for power. You can easily use it with Sparrow Wallet for PC or Nunchuck on mobile, and you can dial it into the right level of security and complexity that you choose. If you want a simple setup, just use 12 words and single signature. If you want passphrases, easy. If you want to add multi-sig or co-signing features, you've got those too. So go to coinkite.com, use code Livera to get 10% off on your cold card or other devices and level up your self-custody today.
Yeah, fascinating. And the other thing, as I'm sure you're well aware, but just for listeners, it's known that, in the past and probably nowadays, a bunch of the public Electrum servers might be run by some of these chain surveillance companies too, because that's another way that they can easily find out, oh, okay, you are coming from this IP address and you're asking me about these particular coins. I'm going to assume you control those coins, right? And so that's like a way for them, for unsuspecting users, to dox their coins to the chain surveillance firms.
Yeah, so if you connect to like an Electrum server, you're going to tell them, hey, I have funds on these addresses. Tell me if anything moved here, and in the future I'm going to use these addresses, and you send this in the same message, so they can cluster them together. In the future I'm going to use these addresses to receive funds. Have you seen anything have I received anything here? So it would be really stupid of like a chain analysis company of not running like custom Electrum server infrastructure that just logs everything. And I actually wrote up like a small like project idea if someone wants to hack on this. Maybe you can link it in the show notes, but I wrote up like a small project ideas of actually like finding out if there is like Electrum servers that all like behave very similarly. So for example, they switch to a new block at exactly the same time. So from there on, we could actually tell if it's like a proxy or
trying to
like
surveil them back and figure out which which of the public Electrum servers are likely to be chain surveillance ones.
Correct. Yeah, correct. So I think with data analysis and monitoring, we can actually turn it around and make this more public. And I haven't gotten the time for it, but I think that's an awesome project for someone to hack on, and maybe even like a research report on it or like a blog post or so.
Interesting. And I guess this is also part of the broader thing of like why, typical like Bitcoiner, advocates will say, hey, run your own Bitcoin node because you get more privacy that way. And
right, maybe, and run your own Electrum server if you're using Electrum. Yeah.
Of course. And so maybe for that, let's say that user who is not willing or not able to run their own full Bitcoin node yet, that's where some of this compact block filter stuff, or maybe in the future, who knows, like maybe this Floresta project is going to be interesting to get more people able to quickly do their own validation without doxing to the public Electrum servers and things like this.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
so let's talk a little bit about compact block relay, because I know this is another area you've done some research and some writing on this, and this kind of comes into like block propagation. And my understanding here is the general idea is for the decentralization of the network, you want this block propagation, to be, you want it to be very low latency and such that nodes are not having to go out and manually ask for transactions, that they can just, do it on their own. Can you just elaborate and explain this?
Yeah, okay. Let me step back one step, because we just talked about block filters or compact block filters, and now we're talking about compact block relay. And I think these are very different things, but they named the same way. So compact block filters, that's BIP 158.
57 and 157. Yeah, 158 is it? Yeah.
Yeah, and 152. So very confusing. Same names, same in the same number range for the BIPs, but this is for block relay, not block filters. Block filters is something where we get like data from about like outputs and coins we have, and block relay is very like actually distribute the blocks when they're mined across the network. So for compact block relay, one of the ideas is that while a block is being mined, you receive a bunch of the transactions already. You already have them in your node's mempool. And now if someone is finding a block, they send the full block, all of these transactions included, and these would arrive twice because you already have them in your mempool. You're spending like the same bandwidth twice. You're sending the same data twice. So this is a problem for bandwidth, and also like sending the full block, like 1 megabyte, 2 megabytes, maybe even like 4 megabytes if there's a big inscription in it. That's slower. Just sending this around the globe is way slower than just sending like a small sketch of it, saying, hey, you already have the transactions. There are in your mempool here, here, and here. Just pick them up and try to construct the block from that. So you send a blueprint, say, hey, you have the transactions, probably have them already in your mempool. Try to reconstruct the block from these transactions you have in your mempool. And if you this normally works fine. This normally works quite well. Sometimes you don't have a transaction, then you need to request it. But that's also fine. The hope is that if like the mempools across the network are very similar, then most of these blocks don't need like an extra request. If we do need to do like an extra request, this is like a whole additional round trip, because you receive like the message, hey, here's a new compact block reconstructed with these transactions, and on the and if you don't have a transaction, you need to say, hey, I'm missing this transaction, please send it to me. And while doing so, you can't reconstruct the block, you can't forward the block again. And well, this, depending on how far away your peer is, it needs like an extra like 100 milliseconds or so, and we want to minimize this delay.
Okay, yeah. So just let me try to recapitulate in simple terms, just both for myself and also for the listeners. So the idea is, when you're running a Bitcoin node, you are also sending and receiving transactions that you are relaying, and the idea is that instead of having to download a full new block, the idea is actually you might already have these transactions that have been relayed to you anyway, so just use that to help reconstruct or create the block without needing to manually go and request, oh, I'm missing the 99th transaction and the 27th transaction or whatever. And the idea is by doing this compact block relay, you're saving that extra round trip of having to go and manually ask for these transactions that you don't know about. Is that broadly right?
Yeah, you're saving on bandwidth, and you're saving also like in general on latency. So you're making block propagation faster. Because you can actually send out like these small data messages and not these big few megabyte messages. There are a few additional things. So for example, so some connections, the node might send even the compact block before it's validated. So you might receive like a compact block of an invalid block. That could happen. But this makes like sending it out before validation makes it so much faster that it's actually worthwhile doing. I guess
the point you're getting at there is mining has become such a brutal competition that mining pools are doing this because they don't want to lose out, because even these small delays in timing can really cost them in their bottom line, right?
Yeah, and this is especially true for like small miners. So a big miner has a higher chance of finding a block. So if they broadcast it, and it takes, let's say hypothetically, 5 seconds to reach a small miner, the small miner would have mined on the old block, which is not going to get any reward from for like 5 seconds. So the big miners have like a good or a higher rate of finding blocks. They find more blocks, so that's less of a problem for them. But for like a really small miner, where it takes a long while for them to reach or to receive the new block, that's a bigger problem. And this causes mining consolidation in some ways, because obviously like the big miners then have an even higher chance of finding the new block, because they actually have the work on like they're building on the new block way earlier than the smaller mining pool.
I see. And so this is coming now to how much of a factor do you think that is? Like, is it meaningful to the point that small mining pools can no longer start up? Or like, I guess what I'm trying to understand from you is this just like, you know, quote unquote nerds arguing about technical minutia, or how relevant is this to the actual real world business model of mining pools?
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in between. And I think we also revisited this recently. So we sat down and as a few of the P2P engineers involved in this, we sat down and we actually talked through this and pulled out some statistics on this. And I think it's not 100% clear if these like worse reconstruction rates. So reconstruction rates is if I have to request a transaction, and everything is getting slower. If these actually make a meaningful or a big impact on the actual block propagation time, and also on like stale rates we see, just because we have this sending out the block before we validate it, which is a huge gain in timings. So I think the bottom line there was we need to dig a bit deeper, and we actually need to look at which blocks propagate fast and which propagate slow, to get an idea for or a better database and not intuition and assumption based model around this. So I think this is even like still an open, somewhat open research problem.
Okay.
But
and so,
it's also some people arguing about like, oh, this could be higher and this could be lower, but also like having a lot of stale blocks is not nice. So
and I guess just to clarify there, the point also there is that if you're a big mining pool, obviously you want to have a very low or zero stale rate, because the more stale rate you have, that's just like directly you were contributing, or you were putting hash rate into a block that was not viable, right?
Yep.
And so basically they want to minimize that or avoid it completely, eliminate it if possible.
I think it's not possible to eliminate it completely, but there's
right,
always going to
really
be some
low,
delay, but you want to minimize it, definitely.
Okay, and so can you just, obviously I know you've written like blog posts and put up whole diagrams about it, but do you have any broad trends you can share with listeners on, you know, the reconstruction rates and the success rates and the failure rates there?
Yes, with the compact block reconstruction rates, I just looked at, for a given day, how many of the blocks that were relayed to my nodes as compact blocks, how many of them needed like an extra round trip, how many of them needed the transaction to be requested. Just plotting this over time, you see in some months it's really good, because everybody agrees on what their mempool policy is, and obviously doing, for example, like one Satoshi per vbyte summer, where some mining pools include transactions, others are not including, or even nodes, the majority of nodes are not including, you're going to need to request them. So these reconstruction rates, they're going to be deep red, so they're going to tank. There's always a transaction, at least one transaction or a few transactions you have to request, which does the extra round trip, which makes propagation just a tiny bit slower.
Okay. Do you have a sense of how much of a delay that was causing?
I don't really have any like data on this, but this is like an active like research topic.
Gotcha. But you would say fair to say that events on the network, such as quote unquote subsat summer, which for listeners, there was like, let's say, a social phenomenon of, okay, so I guess I'm just going to quickly explain it, and you correct me if I'm getting something wrong here, but for a long time in Bitcoin, it was kind of just assumed that 1 sat per VByte was the floor. And so this is kind of hard-coded into a bunch of wallets and everything. But then I think someone tweeted it or posted about this, and it was like a social phenomena that someone said, hey, actually, there are other peers on the network who are willing to relay transactions below 1 sat per VByte. And then this kind of kicked off a trend where a bunch of pools all like lowered their min relay TX fee such that it was now below 1 sat. And some of them were going to 0.1, some of them like went down to 0.1, but back up to 0.5. Anyway, the point is, this was like a social phenomenon that then resulted in many, many transactions where previously 1 sat was just kind of unquestionably the floor for most things. It was like now there were actually a lot of transactions going through at below 1 sat. Have I recapitulated it correctly there, or anything you want to add there?
No, so just because like the nodes all had the same default policy in them, and if you don't change the default policy, you stick with the 1 sat per VByte. But you could have changed, or you can manage to change the to 0.1.
The config, right? So like just for listeners, this is like if you go into your bitcoin.conf file and you type it, I think it's min relay tx fee equals, whatever. And if you manually change that, that's what we're talking about here, just so you know. Yeah. Go on.
And there is like, this doesn't need to be like, this general true for different policy changes. So there is also the upper policy change, and there was the full RBF policy change. For all of them, we see it in some capacity. So, for example, if for the full RBF, the mining pools were all, or many of the mining pools, like I think like more than 95% of the hash rate were all mining full RBF transactions. So, and this deviated from the default policy in for example, Bitcoin Core, and it turns out if you change the policy on your node, you're actually better aligning with what the mining pools do, and you get a better you get better compact block reconstruction rates. Obviously, that's not the only thing we want to optimize for. That's not the holy grail, but it's important to keep in mind that compact block propagation is fast. So
just to explain that a little, it's what you're getting at there is that in the case of full RBF, that was arguably kind of mining led. It wasn't actually Core who kind of came out and changed the default. It was that, the miners had either realized, or maybe Peter Todd or someone was kind of pushing that idea of full RBF. And then because it was already in practice on the network, then at that time, Core changed the default. And yes, at that time, off the top of my head, I think this is like late 2022-ish, around there. There were a few people in opposition of that. So people like John Carvalho or Sergey from Bitrefill were against that. And I think the Moon Wallet guys also didn't like that. But I think it eventually was seen like the network is just going this way. We're just going to have to deal with it. Do you want to add anything there, or on the kind of, I guess, the context around that?
I think I think it makes sense to switch to a default if like a huge part of the network does it, or switch or update the default if a huge part of the network makes it. There's always definitely like friction there, because some people maybe relied on this for their infrastructure, or maybe some people don't like having multiple op returns in their transactions, or like bigger op returns in the transactions. So there's always going to be some friction doing these changes. But yeah, different things to optimize for.
Yeah, but I guess from an observation and analytical standpoint, did you notice that when it was so let's say in the full RBF case, or even were you doing some of these stats even back then in the full RBF days?
Yeah, I think I have some of them. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm curious then, would you say it's fair to say that when the miners were just doing it on their side, not at the Core default level, compact block reconstruction rates were lower, and then after Core changed the default, they went up? Is that a fair statement?
So I ran different nodes with different configurations there. So I ran one node with, for example, full RBF enabled, and this node over the same time span had a much better rate at reconstructing these blocks. So this clearly indicated that the full RBF was the problem here. But you can also see this from just looking at which transaction need to be requested from the peer by if you can tell this transaction actually is like a full RBF replacement. And I haven't seen it before because I rejected it, or I have seen it and rejected it from my mempool because I wasn't allowing full RBFs. And then you can also get it from there. Having multiple nodes and being able to run them in different configuration makes this much easier.
Okay, and so bringing it to the more recent, let's say, debates or arguments, I guess the subset summer is an interesting one, and also the op return limit or default change. So what pattern did you notice there on the, let's say, on the subsat summer? As I'm recalling, you were saying there was that same dynamic, right? Like mining pools had shifted first, block reconstruction rates went down in terms of, the good, like what we want. And then after it became, or at least after more and more people started changing their own setting, would you say the block reconstruction rate came back up, or what are you seeing?
I saw it when I switched my monitoring nodes to a different configuration. So when I turned on, or when I included DPR for the lower default, for example, or when I switched my nodes configuration to a lower default, then I saw it immediately, maybe on the next day or so. When I had like the lower free rate transactions in my mempool, I was able to reconstruct these blocks with a way higher success rate without needing to request like a additional transaction.
Interesting. So so you're saying it really did make a difference on block propagation and the block reconstruction rates. But
it definitely did. It improved the reconstruction rates, and then again, we're not 100% sure this is the only and the biggest factor of block propagation. So we think there's different things.
It's
that
one
affect
of multiple
the speed.
factors. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. So I'm just trying to think through the implications. So then, now in the op return case, did you notice anything there, or do you think it was just too there weren't enough op returns that it made a difference?
I think it was the same thing. I don't recall how many I don't think we saw many of these really big op returns. And even not many of the multiple op returns in the same transaction. But just having one is enough for needing the extra round trip. So switching it over also showed that it improved.
Interesting.
Generally, if there's something like a broader policy, if you have like a broader relay policy active on the network, and you have a stricter policy, you reject some stuff on your node, it's always going to make a difference. Because you're always going to have to request stuff that your stricter policy rejected, but the broader network policy allows.
So,
or minor policy even.
Okay, yeah. So, and I guess bringing it to some of the kind of arguments online about, even nowadays, the people in the NOTS camp would see that as maybe they would argue. Now, I don't know, I'm not personally in that camp, but let's say they're in the camp of, it's not a big deal. It's not changing block propagation by that much. Whereas maybe if you're in the core camp or other camps, you might sort of see it like, no, that is important. Is that how you think there's the different camps are seeing this, or how are you seeing this?
Yeah, definitely. So I think different camps can see this differently. I think only like looking at block propagation isn't the biggest concern. It's more about how is the additional op return space going to be used, and how is the multiple op return outputs in a transaction that we have now, how is this going to be used? I think this is where the biggest divide is, and that this affects, or different policies affect compact block relay or compact block reconstruction. That's just a second order effect. And obviously that it gets tied into the discussion as well, because on one side it's a pro and saying, okay, this actually makes block relay better, and the other side says, hey, doesn't matter too much. But I guess it's not the main point to argue about. It's more the point is more to argue about. Does this change make sense, or does it change doesn't make sense for based on my individual preferences for the network? And I guess I try to be mostly in some way neutral on this, saying, hey, I have the data and the data showed this. Do whatever you think is right with this data. Obviously, I can't be 100% neutral on this, because I definitely have my own preferences and ideas about this. But yeah,
another argument that probably would be interesting to get your perspective on is, I think an argument I hear and see in the Knots camp is, it's a good thing to punish spam miners, and therefore if their block propagation gets worse, then that's a good thing from a perspective of stopping spam. How do you see that? Do you agree or disagree, or how are you seeing that?
Maybe let's circle back to the topic we started on initially. Like, are OFAC sanctions transactions, are they spam? Probably not. But I guess who defines what is spam, and who says this transaction is allowed and this transaction isn't allowed? Obviously, each mining pool or each block template producer can define this for themselves. But I guess as long as it's a valid Bitcoin transaction, you can try to censor it on like policy level, but it's going to make its way into a block eventually, at least hopefully, and that's perfectly cycling back to the topic we had initially. So you're filtering it, but you're not censoring it from ever getting confirmed in a block.
Interesting, yeah, because I can
make
imagine
it more
people
expensive to create it.
Yeah, and I've seen people talk about this concept of a tolerant minority, right? This idea that as long as there's even a few nodes that are more, let's say, liberal or permissive in what they will relay, it's just going to be very difficult to stop that and eventually getting to a miner. And if that miner wants to mine it into a block, or the mining pool or the block template creator wants to put it into a block, then there's very little that can be done to stop that. But I think maybe where some people would disagree is they would say, no, actually there are certain forms of spam. Maybe the argument is more like you can't encode ways to actually stop this spam. I don't know. Maybe that's kind of how, maybe that's how I'm seeing it. At least I see it as like, some of these things are spam, but I just don't think there's a good way to actually stop this spam.
Yeah, totally agree. Ideally, I'd like not to see any of these. Not going to name names, but any of these transactions that people call spam. But I don't see a way of stopping them from being included without building like the infrastructure for filtering other transactions as well.
I see. Yeah. I think those are the key points probably to cover there. What about the Bitcoin Network Operations Collective? I know that's a new idea that you are floating or putting out there. Can you tell us what is the Bitcoin Network Operations Collective? What is this idea?
Yeah, so it goes all back to the same topic I touched on before. I think there is way more monitoring work that can be done for the P2P network, for the Bitcoin network, not only the P2P network, for Bitcoin in general. That might be forks, it might be looking at Electrum servers that are run by channels and other interesting topics to monitor or to look into in terms of data. And what a big company would do, they would spin up or would hire people to work in like a network operations center for their company, or maybe like even a SOC, like a security operations center for their company. But the Bitcoin network isn't really a company. We can't really hire people to do it, and people need to be freely join such a NOC. So what I call it like a Bitcoin network operation collective. So the BNOC It's not the NOC in center. It's the C is not a center. The C is collective. So different people, maybe from a university or different grantees or different Bitcoin Core engineers or what else, whoever is interested in contributing to like the monitoring efforts can join and discuss there. What I set up is like a forum for it. So people can go there and post, for example, their observations, even if it's just a simple, hey, I saw this. Did anyone else see this? Just post a few screenshots or IP addresses or maybe a log from your node, and you say, hey, I saw this. Anyone else noticed this? And then maybe someone will come along and say, hey, I saw this as well. I was wondering. I have time. I can dig into it. And yeah, I think in general, like, have a place for people who are interested in monitoring the network and providing data or requesting data or so for them to find themselves and communicate and so on.
Excellent. So where can people go if they want to find information or contribute in some way with the Bitcoin Network Operations Collective?
So the website is bnoc.xyz. That's a forum very similar to delving. It's not delving because it's meant for these raw posts, these raw observations, and if you in the end turn out to have some call to action or similar, maybe post it to delving. But first go to bnoc.xyz, and there's a couple of people there. There's a couple of topics. I spun up a couple of topics that other people spun up on just general network observations or their papers they're reading that tie into this, or maybe data they have they can share, or maybe data they can request or they want to request from others. So if you're into data and the Bitcoin network or monitoring and Bitcoin network, I think this is going to be a treasure trove for you to explore.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a great spot to leave it there. So listeners, first off, make sure, listeners, you share this episode especially with any Bitcoin developer friends. Go to b10c.me for B10C's blog. And as you mentioned, bnoc.xyz for the Bitcoin Network Operations Collective. B10C, thank you for joining me today and sharing your insights for the listeners.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Stefan.